Okay, welcome to music production compression class. And today we are just going to talk about some of the basic ideas of compression, the parameters of compression, and how to achieve downward and upward compression. So I have a Pro Tools session pulled up, the lead vocal track. Here we go. And I have it on loop. Just give you a second to hear what's going on. Turn her down a little bit. We're peaking. We need compression bad. So here I have the lead vocal track, LV, pulled up jumbo in the window compared to everybody else. But on this track you can see the dynamic range of this lead vocal. You know, she's really belting here, and then there's kind of like a medium part here, and then you have some low-level whispery parts here. So as a mix engineer, you don't want to lose this detail. But with having these peaks, or say this peak, which even happens to look clipped, you can see that even when I shrink the waveform. No, that's not clipped. It looks clipped here. You know, you're going to have to turn your track down so that these parts are, you know, not too loud. But once you do that, you're losing these parts. These parts are really low. So essentially what a compression does is it sets a threshold saying that anything above, say, this point, where my pencil's going across, anything above that point or this point is going to be attenuated below that point. And anything below that point is just going to be left alone. So essentially, say I put my threshold right across here, say, okay, anything above this line all the way through the track is going to be attenuated below that line by a certain ratio. And anything below it is going to stay at that volume. That is downward compression. So let's take a look. Here's my lead vocal track. I'm going to insert a dynamic processor across it, a compressor. And I'm going to loop that track to set this. I'm going to find, say, the most dynamic part of that track. And it looks like maybe the chorus is very dynamic. Let's just go right across here. We're going to loop it. It's kind of loud there, but then here, you know, here it really comes. Yeah, see. So when I set this, I set my release and my attack as low as possible. A 10:1 ratio, technically a limiter. Let me turn this guy down a little. It's still peaking at 0 dB. Then I start to bring my threshold down till I see approximately, I usually go between 3 and 6 dB. See, really nothing here, but all of a sudden you'll see when she, boom, 6 dB. That's the highest, the peaks of her vocals. And then that is almost no attenuation at the lower level stuff. Once I get that threshold set, I take my ratio down to 1:1, no attenuation at the peaks. And then I start to raise that till I see the 3 to 6 dB peak attenuation again. And maybe a little more than that. She's really being dynamic on this track. Okay, so now I have the threshold and the ratio set. Let's blow this track up a little bit more so you can see what's happening. I'm going to, yeah, we'll put this in there. Okay. So now I'm going to set my attack and my ratio. So let's talk about attack and ratio. Your attack is how quickly the onset of this attenuation happens. So see we have minus 8 dB. This is no attenuation. There's no threshold. This is linear input to output. Whatever comes in of the audio signal goes out. When I attenuate this to the 8 dB that we had, here's your input not being touched. Once you hit this threshold, as you can see by this curve, your output is being attenuated by about 6:1. So for every dB above the threshold, it's attenuated at a 6:1 ratio. Your attack is how quickly that attenuation happens. So we get to this peak. I want that to happen pretty quickly, because on a vocal, you don't want it to happen here, because then you're just going to attenuate this part. You want it to happen when this peak is happening. So I set a pretty quick, less than a millisecond, a 450 microsecond attack. The release, on the other hand, you want a little bit longer, quite a bit longer, because you don't want a pumping kind of thing. You don't want it to attenuate here and then release so quickly that all of this stuff gets pumped up. You want a pretty smooth release on a vocal. So that would be, think of your waveform. All right, so let's take a look at our amplitude envelope when compression is applied. So I have something pulled up here in Keynote, and we're looking at a signal here that has been attenuated using compression. So here's your signal coming across the top line without an attenuation. At this point, your signal becomes compressed. So here you see your attack, a gradual curve, and then you see your waveform shrink with that curve. Then this is across the time that it is being attenuated, and then at this point, your release starts to happen. So the audio signal is below threshold, and your release happens to where the signal comes back up gradually to a point of not being attenuated. So that essentially is your amplitude envelope, and that'll be online. You can see pictures of that. And that is what's happening to our vocal. So that is the basics of taking a vocal track, inserting a compression, setting your threshold by lowering the attack and release, putting your ratio to 10:1. You get your threshold where you're having -3 to -6 dB attenuation. Then you lower your ratio, raise that again until you see that max -6 dB. Then you set your attack and release according to your amplitude envelope. You really have to picture your waveform, understand what your waveform is doing, and that'll help you to set the attack and release and play with those parameters.